Turning on the computer. Microphone is on. Chumbawamba t-shirt. Check. Reebok pumps. Check. Why is my computer going so slow? Aaron, why did we have to record this episode over dial-up? Wait, what's going on? Why is my computer so slow? What? What's going on?
Hello there.
Who are you? What's going on?
No one of importance, but you can call me Freaky Friday.
Wait, like the Lindsay Lohan, Jamie Lee Curtis movie?
No, the Barbara Harris, Jodie Foster joint.
Oh, well, sorry. We're actually talking about a different movie today, the 1995 film Hackers.
I know. I've sent a rat into your system, and now you little pop and lock script kiddies are all mine.
But why do you care so much about our little show?
I'm going to make an example of you. Now all your listeners will know not to mock the most elite hacksaws, unless you tell them Hackers is the best film of all time.
Okay, I'm not sure they'll believe it, though. I mean...
You will make them believe, or I'll bring this entire thing down from the inside.
Welcome to Pop and Lock. I'm Landry Ayers.
And I'm Natalie Dowzicki.
Joining us today to discuss the cinematic pinnacle of the 1990s are two returning guests to the show, director and editor of libertarianism.org, Aaron Ross Powell.
Thank you.
And senior fellow at the Cato Institute, Julian Sanchez.
Hack the planet.
We also have a new guest on the show today that we're very excited to be joined by, director of cybersecurity at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Eva Galperin. Eva, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Aaron, I have just one question for you. Why in the world did you want us to watch this film, Hackers?
Because it's amazing. It's an unbelievably great movie. No, I thought it's a fun time capsule of, I think it's maybe the quintessential 90s movie. Like everything about the 90s just boiled down, crystallized like right there. And it gives a sense of kind of the way that at this early stage of computing, like the internet was just becoming a thing. This is just when I think we were switching over to using the internet from the halcyon days of BBSs. And the way that the culture was wrestling with this, and the place of the people who were using computers and the people who were scared of the computers. And it's a fun way to explore like the way that things have changed in the cultural place of tech between now and then, and the way that they're largely the same, but mostly just because it's really fun and the clothes are great.
Eva, Julian, did you have a fond memory of this film upon rewatching it before this?
Well, so I'll say I know I saw it back in the late 90s or early noughts, but I didn't remember that. I was in college, so I a lot of things I saw in college I don't remember that clearly at the time. But it definitely brought back kind of memories of my adolescence. So when I was 12 and 13 years old, I went by Lord Cardboard and ran a dial-up BBS in the 201 area code, represent 201, and I subscribed to 2600 and Mondo 2000 and all that stuff, and so I was very much conscious of that culture. So I sort of enjoyed all the little Easter eggs that were sort of throwbacks to elements of that time and place, and that environment of kind of semi-comical panic about teenagers crashing the world economy somehow inadvertently.
So Julian mentioned a nice hacker name, and I was wondering if anyone else has hacker names of their own, or what their hacker name would be. Aaron?
I should clarify, my online handle was Lord Cardboard. I'm not admitting to any violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. at any point in my life.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Eva, were you in that scene at all as an impressionable
young
youth?
adult?
As a young adult, as a feral child. I was a feral child on the internet. And this movie came out at a time when I was spending a lot of time online because I did not enjoy what we call my peers. And at the same time, the people who on whom this was based were people that I would later go on and meet, which I found very weird. So at the time, I remember watching hackers and going, oh, like, Penn and Teller, Hack the Gibson, the big red book that won't fit on the shelf. These are all things that I knew. But I was offended at how wrong it was, because it didn't occur to me that there was nothing more cinematically boring than watching a bunch of, teenagers with acne like slam Mountain Dew and wait for scripts to finish running. And trying to explain what camaraderie was like on a BBS or in a forum was extremely boring compared to just like, and now they're all hanging out in this nightclub playing video games. So yeah, I remember thinking that it was a very bad movie with a very good soundtrack.
I agree. I thought the music was really, really good. I was pleasantly surprised based on what I thought about the rest of the movie so far. But I found myself really, really enjoying the music. So you bring up an interesting point, Eva, about the way it sort of depicts what hacking and how hackers are. Do you think the movie does it just get it wrong because it can't get it can't dramatize what the sort of culture of hackers really is and how it actually operates? Or do you think it is like a bad faith, or not even bad faith, but an inaccurate representation of the desires of hacking culture?
I think to some extent it did a fairly good job of getting some of the essential bits of hacking culture across. The camaraderie, the sharing of secret knowledge, that sort of thing. I think it really did a good job at. But in order to do that, it had to sacrifice a lot of the realism, which honestly would have been cinematically very, very boring. Watching people sit around in their basements waiting for scripts to run and ordering pizza is just not very exciting. And trying to explain why this should be exciting to an audience that doesn't even use the internet every day. And that isn't used to the idea that your friendships are all formed online and your friends groups are online and this secret information comes to you from the internet. Trying to explain that to an audience that didn't kind of live it every day, I completely understand why they made the choices that they did. But I can tell you that 12-year-old me, deeply offended.
I mean, I'll say maybe the sort of least plausible thing about it is the premise that all these people who are fairly high level hackers happen to all go to the same high school, which my recollection is there were maybe one or two people. Granted, I didn't go to this sprawling Manhattan. I don't remember if it's supposed to be some kind of technical magnet school or something, but in general, I think it was you might eventually meet in real life some of the folks you might at the payphones at the Citibank or whatever in New York where they have the 2600 meeting, but the idea that you would just there would be like a kind of physical social scene of hackers in the space of one particular high school was like not the high school I went to, certainly. I think bits of it, when they're doing the sort of social engineering stuff or the dumpster diving, the part where you see a scene early on where Johnny Lee Miller is, calling someone up and sort of feigning to be, he sort of looked up the names in the company directory and saying, I know I need and he's sort of dropping names from other people in the company to make it sound like, yeah, of course I'm an employee. I need to read the number off the modem so I can dial in. Is, obviously done sort of comedically, but that's not wildly wrong, I don't think. But yeah, when it comes to the actual hacking, it turns into Tron, and like they're playing a kind of weird video game, because as Eva says, actually just watching someone run a script or is not particularly thrilling cinema.
Well, I would also like to jump in there that even if we didn't, it could have been way more boring if it represented hacker culture correctly or accurately. I still thought the movie was relatively boring to begin with. So this is the first time I watched this film. I know, gasp. I should be ashamed. But I just think with all of the unrealistic elements, the crazy CGI, all of that jazz was added in kind of an awful way. I don't know how else to describe it, but for a first watch, I did think it was boring, which makes it seem to me that what Eva was suggesting, that it could have been even more boring if it depicted hackers accurately, seems rather frightening, and I'm glad that they didn't do that.
So you're telling me that computers are not just rooms full of lucite backlit columns with like matrix text scrolling on them that you then have to walk through and send like equations through your mind in order to hack into? That doesn't sound accurate to me.
Is it even hacking if there aren't like weird trippy visuals?
Before or after the actual hacking?
As we're mentioning hacking necessarily being somewhat boring, I think this is, we're not talking about Mr. Robot today, but that seems like maybe the first and only instance where they figured out how to make quite realistic hacking look cinematically really interesting, but you just have to do it in a very different way than the movie Hackers approaches it.
It's also a very different audience. The people who are watching Mr. Robot, for the most part, have lived their lives online. You don't have to explain to them that there's an entire subculture. You don't have to explain to them, sort of what the basics of social engineering are. You're talking to a much more savvy audience.
And I should say, Hackers, so for all that it's sort of, again, trons out the hacking scenes, is full of some kind of delightful little Easter eggs for folks who are sort of familiar with that culture. The opening scene where the sort of the young Johnny Lee Miller, aka Zero Cool, is sentenced for releasing a worm which accidentally crashes all these sort of big financial hardware, is a kind of nod to the Morris worm, which was a kind of intended to be a kind of security vulnerability demo by a Cornell grad student named Robert Tappan Morris, who was, as it happened, the son of an NSA cryptographer. But, he had sort of made an error in how often it would replicate, and so ended up causing quite a lot of damage by crashing a lot of computers on the sort of nascent late 1980s internet. One of the characters is kind of a double reference. One of the characters, the one played by Matthew Lillard, is his name is Emmanuel Goldstein, which is, of course, the obvious references to 1984, but it's also the pseudonym of the editor of 2600 magazine. And his hacker name is Serial Killer, which I assume is a reference to Robert Draper, Captain Crunch, who was a phone freak from the 70s or 80s, who was known for, it was called Captain Crunch because 2600, which is the name of a kind of storied hacker magazine, is the tone in hertz that would, for a while in the 70s and early 80s, would let you essentially make free phone calls on payphones. It would drop trunk. It would basically trick the payphone into giving you a free line. And he discovered that you could use the whistle that was given out as a kind of free toy in boxes of Captain Crunch, and it happened to generate exactly this tone. So you could use this kind of breakfast cereal toy to get free phone calls. This is when it was getting online by modem. If you were doing anything non-local, was in fact extraordinarily expensive. I remember, as a young adolescent, some awkward conversations with my parents about the phone bill I'd racked up by dialing into various BBSs around the country. So it's, it is sort of peppered with these things that it doesn't really make that much effort to kind of hang a lampshade on. They're just sort of there. And if you were sort of steeped in the kind of hacker culture or whatever of that era, you kind of pick that up and go, oh, they're referencing, Captain Crunch. They're referencing Emmanuel Goldstein from 2600. But if you, it's obviously aimed at a mass audience. So if you don't pick up those things, it sort of slides along and you don't feel like lost.
Interesting and obscure references that sort of collided with my life later on. For example, there are references to Operation Sun Devil. I was not of the generation of people who got picked up in Operation Sun Devil, but definitely a lot of the people that I learned my skills from had sort of early brushes with the FBI that were not very pleasant. Got to do things like spend Christmas in jail. They also went and interviewed all the people at Loft Heavy Industries in Cambridge. So you have sort of versions of various well-known Loft personalities there. For example, the chain-smoking kid Joey is allegedly based on Joe Grand, who went by Kingpin, who now runs a fairly large hardware company called I think Kingpin Industries. He made the badges at DEF CON for many, many, many years. And if you listen to them, they sound exactly the same. It's actually kind of amazing.
This makes me wonder, though, about, the writing, the genesis of this movie, because on the one hand, if you watch it, it looks like it's a movie put together by people who only know about computers from what they happen to see in other movies about hackers. But on the other hand, it's filled with all of these kinds of references. And so I just wonder how much the kind of like nonsense of it was intentional versus how much of it was like, so let me ask it this way. We've got, did the writers go in and just read the names of a bunch of people and decide to drop them in? Or did they actually know what they were talking about, but decide to make this kind of off the wall, unrealistic, bonkers setup for fun or for marketing purposes or for studio interference? Because it does seem like it's almost this kind of schizophrenic thing going on here.
My guess is that somebody in the studio said no one will understand this.
Yeah, I do know. In pre-production, there was, like, for instance, like Kevin Mitnick served as sort of a consultant briefly with some of the filmmakers and the cast and crew that went on. But I don't know for sure how much of it was really pre-planned from before that.
I got the sense that, at least the screenwriter had sort of done his research. It sounds like he had interviewed or hung out with hackers enough to have a kind of sense of like the real scene was, but I think they probably correctly decided that you needed to if you wanted this to be kind of a mass audience film, you needed to sort of spice it up and have chases and have weird and rollerblading is key. It's very hot. It is funny how kind of, Aaron said earlier, how kind of quintessentially 90s this feels. They're rollerblading everywhere. The clothes are, if you said dress people 90s, you'd have the kids all have like the Nirvana posters and the, kind of bands of the era.
Serial Killer is wearing a Velvet Underground t-shirt.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he's got the he's got the cover of Transformer, right? The Lou Reed Transformer cover.
That's
shirt.
Explained by there's the throwaway line in there about how his parents like missed Woodstock, I think, and kept trying to make up for it. Because what was said. So
having grown up in that environment in San Francisco, that was the bit that rang the most true for me.
And then at the very beginning, Zero Chill, or I guess. Yeah, this is right before he decides to change his name to Crash Override. When he's sort of social engineering to get the modem number. He calls himself Mr. Eddie Vedder, I believe, is what he says he is. So it certainly is part of that. One thing that Matthew Lillard's character, Serial Killer, says when Joey is kind of trying to sort of talk himself up, along with several of the other hackers at the club that they all attend, he's sort of trying to prove himself, and they're all shutting him down. And he says, "What you got to do is a righteous hack
to be elite. If you want to be elite,
to be elite, yes."
Which you have to spell with a 3 and a 7 and
right.
Yeah.
I was wondering, there was a part of me that thought calling it a righteous hack, it came off to me as a sort of double entendre, and I wondered if that was intentional. Like, was it very clearly that he was using righteous as like a synonym for cool, or was there some sort of double meaning that he's saying that the hack you have to do has to be, for some sort of more highfalutin cause, righteous in its desire? And do you think that was intentional?
I think it was just used as a sort of synonym for epic. It needed to be big. It needed to be flashy. It doesn't necessarily need to go full Robin Hood, which I think is sort of implied in the term righteous. But I'm not sure that was on purpose.
And I think that sort of gets at something that Aaron had brought up before we started recording that he noticed, which was the reading of the Conscience of a Hacker, the manifesto that the cop is reading in the police car as they're sort of investigating these hackers. For those of us who aren't familiar with that, what is the significance of including that in a sort of almost throwaway fashion?
I'm gonna kick that question over to Julian and Eva, who are probably more familiar with the backstory. I was aware of Frack magazine at the time, or I was aware of it before seeing this movie, but I was not an avid reader. I did reread. I will say we'll put a link to the Conscience of a Hacker in the show notes because it's pretty great. It's worth reading, but yeah, I mean, maybe one of you could speak to kind of the ethos of the time, or where that manifesto was coming from.
Sure. Yeah. So this was a kind of, at the time, and the time here meaning kind of the early 90s, sort of legendary document penned by someone who I think his pseudonym was The Mentor, but became very current. I mean, if you had any kind of connection to that culture, you had probably read this at least once or twice, and in a way was a kind of spiritual cousin to John Perry Barlow's Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, in the sense that, so it's kind of cri de coeur from a young man kind of defending hacking as this fundamentally as an act of curiosity, and as something that's part of a way of finding a kind of better world than is encountered in real life. Where, I mean, a lot of the tone of it is not just about what society regards as criminal, but why hacking and sort of computer culture, again in the late 80s, early 90s, is something that was appealing to a kind of young, smart teenager. The idea that this is a place where, this online spaces where your sort of skill matters and not how attractive or cool you are, where computers provide this realm where you can learn to write a program, and if it doesn't work, it's because you made a mistake, not because it doesn't like you or because you didn't wear the right shirt. And so, in a sense, this sort of simpler and purer realm, and articulating this idea that the desire to explore this space is something that should not be frightening or get people demonized. Again, we have to remember, in the context of the late 80s and early 90s, it was not uncommon to have government officials going on TV talking about hackers, the way they might talk about Satanists, basically, as this kind of chilling threat that could bring down airplanes and shut down the power at any instant. And I think we see that in the movie. So there's the other really great hacker movie of the 90s, like objectively a better movie, Sneakers. With an incredible cast, Robert Redford and Ben Kingsley and Sidney Poitier and Dan Aykroyd. But that one begins with a couple of young 60s radicals hacking into financial institutions to make kind of stealing money, but to make donations to various worthy causes. The NAACP or the environmental groups or whatever it was, and so they then get busted. But it's clear that in terms of kind of righteous hacks, this is something they're doing with some kind of social mission to it. And the initial sort of hacking we see in Hackers after the sort of Morris worm scene is Dade or Zero Cool or Crash Override busting into a TV station to put sort of cheesy old sci-fi movies on the late night television, and then getting into this kind of comical fight with who we later discover is Angelina Jolie or Acid Burn, who is trying to kick her out, not because she is trying to do something else, but because this is her turf, and he's now hacked into a machine that she hacked first. And so they have this sort of test of skill over who's going to get to control this system. And, there's just obviously no deep sort of social purpose to it. It is something they're doing because they want to explore. They're not going there to put on, socially conscious public service messages. They're exploring and trying to find out what they can do, which, of course, makes a lot more sense for teenagers, I think. There isn't this sense that, there's some higher purpose to what they're doing until the end, when, of course, they are hacking the planet and trying to save us. But even there, I mean, it's interesting. I think the upshot of this movie, the kind of if there's a moral sort of to the movie, it is about the power of this sort of misfit community. It's one of these movies where at the end they ultimately succeed, not just because the protagonists have the best hacker skills, or and kind of beat the bad guy in a Tron contest, but because these sort of pirate TV personalities who run a hacker show have sent out a call, and so hackers kind of all over the world. We cut to Japan and Italy and other places where people are kind of helping out by doing their own little bit of hacking from afar. And so I think the kind of ultimate sort of idea here is, there's the short-term cause by the end of stopping the bad guy who's going to capsize some ships so he can steal money from a company in a kind of elaborate plot with Dr. Melfi from The Sopranos. But rather that, hey, it turns out there's this global community that is, doesn't just stop at the people you physically know at the high school you all attend. And when the call goes out, they do all show up. They all kind of pitch in, and not necessarily even because it's the right thing to do to protect their own, to stop this bad guy, but because they are a community and they protect their own.
Can we talk about Mr. the Plague? So one of the big differences between watching this movie as a sort of a teenager or a preteen and watching this movie as an adult is that sort of the first time around, you start by relating to all of the kids in high school, and you're part of your little gang, and you're running around on your rollerblades, and then we all grow up to become Mr. the Plague. We all grew up to become, what were sysadmins and then security people. And these are jobs now that people go to make a living, and they don't build their entire, personality around it anymore. And I think that really speaks to a shift which got much more extreme after this movie in the information security industry. Information security, well, to begin with, didn't used to be an industry, wasn't actually a thing. Your hackers were mostly teenagers. They were largely unemployed. They were doing things for fun. And those people grew up and started security companies. They, started Loft Heavy Industries and At Stake and F-Secure and Luda Security. And they're the adults in the room now. They're not necessarily, capsizing ships in order to make money, but the idea of who is a hacker, I think, has really changed since the 90s. And there was something so kind of wonderfully pure about the notion that you take all of these skills and you just use them to have fun, instead of you take all of these skills and you use them to make money or to figure out how to, destroy the hotel or taxi industry or something like that. And that's not a thing that we really talk about a lot anymore, because the whole notion of who a hacker is has changed so much.
Puts me in mind of a line from another great Matthew Lillard movie, SLC Punk, where his dad says to him, they're having the argument about, you're not punk anymore, Dad. And his dad says, I didn't sell out, I bought in. And that's to extent what you're describing.
Well, I was going to say, it occurs to me, right, to the extent we have kind of, paranoia about hackers now, it is definitely not, some teenager with kind of dark arts we don't quite understand might do something crazy as a prank. It's the well-trained and well-paid members of a foreign intelligence service might do something as part of a kind of coordinated attack sponsored by a foreign state. That's or some very sophisticated kind of criminal organization. So it seems like the nature of the perception of the bad hacker has very much changed. Because the world has changed, of course, in part. But I feel like we don't hear in the same way at all now about, what might some teenager do? It's what might a Russian intelligence officer or a Chinese intelligence officer do?
And that brings up something that struck me watching this, and it's not unique to hackers, but to kind of this, call it roughly cyberpunk genre in general of, the computer criminals versus the man sort of thing, is who the bad guys are. Because if we go back to the Conscience of a Hacker manifesto, the part that's read, the two Secret Service agents sitting in their car and the ones reading it to the other, the part that's read in there is, on the one hand, is like very subversive, because he says, we exist without skin color, without nationality, without religious bias, and you call us criminals. You build atomic bombs, you wage wars, you murder, cheat, and lie to us and try to make us believe it's for our own good, yet we're the criminals. And the you in that, given the list of things that's the atomic bombs and so on, the you is states, is governments. The governments are the ones branding them as criminals. And yet we have, like in this movie, for example, the bad guys are these corporate actors. And yes, there's like government agents who are coming after them, but the government agents are kind of dupes. They're just pawns of the corporate actors. And in all of the, in the earliest cyberpunk and on through, like it's always like the evil corporation. But as you're saying, Julian, right now, like the threat of the hackers right now, there's the people who, break into Target to steal our credit card numbers and whatnot. But it's like state, it's foreign intelligence, it's state actors. And so why is it that the ethos of the time, the ethos of these stories of hackers, whether it's this movie in 1995 or, like Gibson's Sprawl trilogy, or even say like going all the present, Mr. Robot, the bad guys are the corporations, and it's not governments typically are the ones that are the real threat or the ones that need to be taken down. And just one thing I might posit is it does seem like maybe there's, and this shows up in Hackers very clearly, that like governments are too bumbling or too ignorant about this stuff to genuinely be bad guys in this space.
The basis of my entire career.
Yeah, I think that's right. Wendell Pierce, who played Bunk on The Wire, is the kind of lead Secret Service agent, and he's sort of portrayed throughout as someone who is not actually himself particularly technically skilled, isn't kind of confronting them on their own terms, is, part of the sort of spreading fear about ominous hacker peril, but kind of more comic relief than the serious threat, right, is the ex-hacker, or I guess still a hacker kind of corporate guy, the Plague, Fisher Stevens. So, yeah, and I think that's probably right, Aaron. I think the perception that, if you want the kind of a contest of equals, this is certainly at the time, you are not going to find the most skilled technical people working for the government. Maybe you were at NSA, but not at an agency with kind of domestic law enforcement responsibilities. They were the ones kind of trying to figure out what all these blinking lights did.
Well, there was also a point in the movie too where the hackers were described as they use the word specifically terrorists. I believe it's like in one of the news briefings that the Secret Service does. And I thought it was interesting because obviously this movie came out pre 9/11, and our perception of terrorists has obviously changed since then. But I just thought it was interesting the way they were painting the hackers as very dangerous. And I'm sure that was playing into hacker, let's say, phobia of the time, as we've all been hinting at. But how has that hacker phobia changed to the point where now it's, like Aaron was hinting at, that like it's other foreign governments that we would consider like the biggest threat is now cyber terrorism? So
or
I'm a little our own government, right? I'm a little confused on how we made that giant leap.
The APT1 report.
For those of us who wouldn't familiar know that, can you explain what that would be?
Sure. So this was like 2011, 2012. Please don't quote me. And a security company, I'm fairly certain it's Mandiant, came out with a report about how how Chinese government actors had been trying to break into the New York Times. And they were particularly interested in unmasking the sources of several stories about all kinds of sort of like backroom dealings and corruption within the Chinese government. And it is my understanding that they were not looking to unmask the identities of these people in order to bring them milk and cookies. So this was, as far as I know, the first time that a government or government-aligned set of actors were identified as an advanced persistent threat, APT. We're given a number, 1, because they're the first. Were identified, like here's where they work, here's the building they're coming out of, here they are. You can see them sort of working 9 to 5. And that really changed people's perceptions, not only of who hackers were, but of what hackers wanted to do. People in journalism prior to then didn't consider people breaking into their accounts to be one of their, the biggest and most looming thing in their threat model. And when I started doing things like writing surveillance self-defense, one of the very first things the EFF did was we concentrated a lot on how to defend journalists and how to help journalists and activists learn to defend themselves against these sort of state-sponsored threats. And that was because nobody had been thinking about that before.
But I also had kind of a more fun question. Who is the most famous real-life hacker?
Probably Kevin Mitnick.
That's the name that comes to my mind as someone who's would not say that they are well versed in hacker knowledge, but that is one that I'm certainly much more aware of.
His is certainly the last like kind of trial of a single hacker that I remember being like big news.
Ross Ulbricht?
Yeah, Ross. I mean, and that's the thing is you bring that name up. I don't think of Ross Ulbricht sort of conceptually as a hacker necessarily, which is I think an interesting distinction. You could also say someone could consider Aaron Swartz a hacker necessarily, and who is very well known for what went on when he sort of went into JSTOR's databases and everything. But I think, like you said, Eva, the concept of what a hacker is and wants has kind of shifted who we consider to be both a threat and who kind of earns that label.
Somewhere up there might be Kevin Poulsen not necessarily because he was so famous for his hacking, but because he then went on to be a somewhat prominent journalist for Wired and then the I think Daily Beast. So.
Well, do you want to argue that Julian Assange was the world's most famous hacker?
Oh yeah,
There's that guy.
But again, I guess it's one of those. What he's famous for is not really the hacking exactly. Right? It's the.
They're trying to nail him on the hacking. That's
true. Well, okay, true. Although somewhat spuriously in the. But I mean, the actual charges is that he sort of agreed to help crack a password that it sounds like he didn't succeed at. So
a famous failed hacker, maybe.
Wow, he's not to. You be careful. He's gonna cut into this stream when we're podcasting, and
I bet he's got a lot of opinions about 1995's hackers too.
I think it's very clear that Julian Assange was influenced by hackers, by this whole idea that that the people at the bottom, that the cyberpunks, were going to influence global events, and we're going to go head to head with the instruments of state. And I'm not about to say that went out well, but it was definitely an influence in there.
Does that, though, that makes me think, and this might tie back, Eva, to your point about kind of becoming the adults in the room, is so a lot of people who were in that scene went on to become cybersecurity people themselves. But it does seem like the kind of ethic of it, of exploring ways to, as the Hacker Manifesto lays out, to kind of establish these other worlds free from the control of governments and, free from kind of the social rules that made a lot of these people uncomfortable in high school and so on, has shifted, that it's less now about breaking into stuff, trying to figure out if you can, make free payphone calls and so on, or, dumpster dive for passwords, and more that it's now shifted to building things that enable more people to themselves escape from these systems of control. So I'm thinking about, like the crypto community, right, has that kind of ethic, but it's less about breaking into stuff. It's more about building new things, or people who are building encrypted messaging services or other systems that would enable all of the rest of us to live these kinds of protected lives from surveillance and control. Is that accurate at all? Like, is it the same? Seems like the same ethic has moved into kind of building versus breaking in.
I think people are still breaking in. If you go Google Zoom vulnerabilities for this week.
Sure.
I think the primary difference is that it used to be that encrypted messaging, email, the online chat, the digital currency, that these were all things used by people on the margins, by geeks and nerds, and by people who expected to be thrown into lockers by jocks. And that's not the case anymore. We are the grown-ups. We are the adults in the room. And we have a level of responsibility that we absolutely did not have in the early 90s to use that power well. And some people have, and some people did not.
Yeah, I would, I completely agree with that, what Eva was just saying. So we're about wrapping up here. Does anyone else have any other thoughts on hackers before we move into our little locked in segment about what we talk about other media we've been consuming? Was there anything about hackers we didn't get to hit on that we still want to?
Actually, last thing I'd say is just to leapfrog off that is, it is interesting to me that in a sense, right, Plague, the Fisher Stevens character, seems more. I mean, he seems basically, on the spectrum somewhere. Clearly, he's got a kind of Nietzschean speech about how he doesn't have friends, only kind of temporary allies, and do we want to be allies? But the kind of the main protagonist couple here are extraordinarily, Johnny Miller and Angelina Jolie, extraordinarily attractive kind of white people who, it seems like, probably, in any real social environment would not be, who are very cool and going to clubs and rollerblading around and are, you kind of go, well, how alienated are these people plausibly really? and you have you have an interestingly kind of diverse cast. You have the phone freak, who's a Latino actor who's kind of coded. I don't think it's explicit, but he's sort of coded queer in the way he sort of presents in the film. But otherwise, you kind of get the sense that, well, how marginal, are these guys actually that, marginal seeming? They don't seem like that. Wow, they seem quite popular, and they're going to clubs, and they're having kind of a grand old time in physical space. And so, to some extent, one of the things that I think, is missing from hackers is the sense of, that these are people for whom an online kind of world in which they can feel more comfortable is something that would be necessary and appealing. Again, you gotta sell the movie tickets.
It doesn't match my experience as a 14-year-old hanging out at friends' houses on BBSs at all. None of us were that cool.
I'm still not that cool.
Me neither.
We're all that cool, guys. Look at us now on a podcast talking about 1995's hackers. We've made it.
All right. So now we've come to the part of the show where we get to explore what other media we're all consuming lately that's not hackers. This is Locked In. So Aaron, Eva, Julian, what are you locked into now?
Well, I have just I'm watching 2 almost entirely identical shows right now about cyberpunk dystopias because I don't get enough of that in my regular life. And so I'm watching season 3 of Westworld. And I really hope that whoever is writing Westworld these days is just taking enormous bags of money and leaving them on William Gibson's doorstep. It's here. We know we owe you money. Take this money. Yeah. And then I started watching Devs on Hulu, which has a whole lot of very similar themes and starts with, the people working for some potentially weird and evil company that has managed to muddle all of humanity, while, living in a Victorian in San Francisco and taking what is pointedly not a Google bus to somewhere in the South Bay. And it feels both very familiar and also, is this what our lives look like to people outside?
So TV, my partner and I have been watching The Magicians, a sci-fi series based on Lev Grossman's novels, which is now in its final season, as well as season 3 of Westworld. I just started Doom Eternal, the game, and am intending to finish Control, another kind of shooter game. It's sort of inspired by the X-Files and a little-known sci-fi miniseries called The Lost Room from the early noughts. And also,
I love The Lost Room.
Well,
so good.
The game Control is obviously lifting a lot of its ideas from there. And a game I started a while back called Return of the Obra Dinn, which is a great kind of detective mystery game off Steam that I think that is on the Switch now too, but is quite good. And then reading, aside from the kind of boring stuff I read as a surveillance person, I just got through the first book of Richard Kadri's Sandman Slim series, which is a kind of noir urban fantasy. I am reading the History of Opera by Carolyn Parker and Roger something, and I just started N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became, and so enjoying the Sandman Slim. They're kind of light, fun, frivolous stuff, but we need a little something light these days.
I am sheltering in place with 3 young children in a small house, and so my media consumption has been rather less than I would like it to be. But I guess I am binging 2 different things. So first, my 10-year-old daughter recently discovered Doctor Who. So I'm rewatching all of the new Doctor Who with her. We just wrapped up the first season of David Tennant, and that has been quite fun, not just because the show is quite fun, and I always forget how just kind of relentlessly charming it is, but also just watching my daughter really get into Doctor Who and become entirely obsessed to the point where, don't tell her, but she has a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. I just ordered her the Doctor Who role-playing game, which should be here whenever Amazon feels like it. So she can kick into that with her friends. So that's been a lot of fun. And then on my own, the almost all of the 55 volumes of Ed McBain's 87th Precinct novels are free on Amazon's Kindle lending library. So I have been making up for lost time on those. And those are just probably the best series of police novels ever written, and wonderful as kind of time capsules. The first one was published in 1956, and they go all the way through to, I think, his death in 2005 or 2006. And so just the changing nature of American society and attitudes towards police. And they also feature I think the best dialogue this side of Elmore Leonard.
So far in quarantine, I have been locked into. I just started Killing Eve.
Oh, so good.
Which is I really enjoyed. I've only seen about 3 episodes so far, but I'm hoping to delve into that a little bit more. Been rewatching Arrested Development, just as sort of a comfort watch. I also, speaking of Dungeons and Dragons, Aaron, have started a second Dungeons and Dragons campaign with some friends and my brother, specifically set in Wildmount, which is the new setting that Wizards of the Coast just released in partnership with Matthew Mercer and Critical Role. So I got my Explorer's Guide to Wildmount campaign guide, and have been sort of perusing through that and trying to learn about this whole setting and sort of craft my own story for my players to go about in during that. I also, game-wise, have been I've been playing a lot of Animal Crossing New Horizons on my Switch.
Stop.
I've been farming pears and cherries, and I am operating on an entirely bug sale-based economy on my island. I've been selling a lot of bugs to the little store in town.
I would say you reminded me that my Call of Cthulhu group has not met since the quarantine began, but we were on the verge of starting Masks of Nyarlathotep, which is a kind of sprawling Call of Cthulhu campaign. And now that everyone's actually kind of stuck at home, it was almost kind of difficult to schedule a bunch of adult professionals to meet up. But as long as we can do it over Roll20 or Zoom, maybe now is the time to finally get into that, when everyone is sort of stuck without a lot of other physical presence obligations.
I have been wanting to get back into Return of the Obra Dinn, which you mentioned, Julian. I have it on Steam, and I played several hours of it, and then got busy and had to put it down, but I need to return to it. And I also have been reading, I just started Killers of the Flower Moon, which is about a series of murders in, I believe, Oklahoma, and the birth of sort of the FBI, I believe, which is a fascinating story, true crime, but not necessarily as gruesome as some other true crime stories tend to be. So that's what I've been enjoying.
For me, I'm also a huge Westworld fan, so I've been keeping up with the recent season. I also watched all of Tiger King in one day. I was pretty proud of myself for that. And then on the reading front, I finished Where the Crawdads Sing, and I started a new book called Ghost Wars by Steve Cole. It's a nonfiction book about the war in Afghanistan. It's very interesting. I don't really do much gaming, but I think by the end of this, Landry may or may not convince me to start playing Animal Crossing, especially if I have to be stuck at home for much longer.
Come to my island, Natalie. Come visit me in my tropical paradise.
One of these times I'll just give in. When it's raining.
Every type of fruit.
So that's kind of what I've been doing. I'm not really into too many TV shows right now, except for my normal ones like Westworld, like I already said. So that's what I've been locked into. Oh, and puzzles. That doesn't count as media, but I've been really into puzzles.
There. Now all will know not to mock the most elite hackers. Now to just spoof a different IP as I make my way out of the system. What's going on?
Not so fast, Freaky Friday. Or should I say, Aaron Powell.
Hey, Landry.
Enough. You thought you could get us to watch one of your favorite movies, and you succeeded. But you've got another thing coming if you think you're getting away with this one. Computer, execute command, elite override. Much better. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show today, or have your own feelings about this cinematic classic, make sure to follow us on Twitter at Pop and Locke Pod. That's Pop, the letter N, Locke with an E, Pod. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. We look forward to unraveling your favorite show or movie next time. Pop and Locke is produced by me, Landry Ayers, as a project of libertarianism.org. To learn more, visit us on the net at www.libertarianism.org.